Okay, so you know why you're here. You gave us the sources. That material focused on Donald Trump and universities, specifically that YouTube discussion with Tenenbaum and Kabak.
Right.
And as we started digging in, it wasn't just, a political spat. It felt like it really opened up the financial underpinnings and these deep ideological tensions in American higher education.
Yeah, it's more than just headlines.
Totally. So our mission here in this deep dive is to really pull out the core issues in this conflict. What does it actually tell us about universities now and maybe where they're headed, especially, financially and ideologically?
Makes sense.
We kind of start with Kabak's first point, right? Up maybe a ceiling for Trump. But Tenenbaum immediately reframes it. He says it's Donald Trump versus Harvard.
Yeah, that shift is key. Kabak sees maybe broader politics, but Tenenbaum, he really zeroes in on Harvard. It signals this isn't just general policy talk.
It's a showdown.
Exactly. A direct confrontation with this, symbolic and really powerful institution. And it immediately brings up how these places are funded and maybe what they stand for.
Yeah, okay, right. Let's unpack the funding then. Tenenbaum highlights this very American system for how they get their cash. It's not like, say, Argentina, where the state might heavily subsidize universities. Here, it's driven by tax-deductible donations.
And not just a little bit deductible?
No, that's the kicker. Tenenbaum points out it's a 100% deduction for giving to nonprofits, which includes universities.
Yeah.
That's a massive incentive.
Huge, especially for wealthy individuals and families. And Kabak touched on this too, this historical role of, prominent American families being these major, consistent donors.
It creates a sort of legacy of giving.
It does, but what's really interesting or maybe problematic about that donation model is the vulnerability it creates.
How so?
Well, because they rely so much on private generosity, they become kind of susceptible to the priorities, the concerns, even the whims of their donors.
Oh!
And also, potential government actions that could mess with those donations. Tenenbaum's point about the 100% deduction just underlines how big a deal that incentive is in shaping the whole financial picture.
And a lot of this donated money flows into those, enormous university endowments. Harvard's what was the figure?
$56 billion, a staggering amount.
$56 billion.
Yeah.
Wow. But as Tenenbaum explained, it's not like a giant slush fund they can just dip into, right?
Not at all. Often these endowments, the principal donation, comes with very specific strings attached, like this money is only for funding this specific professorship or that particular research area.
Got it. Restricted funds.
Precisely. But the key thing, the really crucial part for their operating budget is the interest those endowments generate.
Okay.
That interest often becomes a much more flexible source of income for the university. Combine that with the incredibly high tuition fees.
Yeah, Tenenbaum mentioned something like over $100,000 a year for a top school like Harvard.
Around that, yeah. Plus some limited state or federal funding, usually tied to specific research projects. So you see it's this complex financial mix.
Right, and that complexity meets the ideological battle head-on. Kabak brought up the whole issue of woke culture, these perceived ideological echo chambers on campus. He used the Palestinian cause activism as a recent example.
Kabak definitely framed that as a major point of friction.
But Tenenbaum offered some historical perspective there.
He did, yeah. He pointed out that universities have, pretty much always been centers for protest on all sorts of issues. He even mentioned his own experiences with anti-Semitism back in the 70s on campus.
So protest itself isn't new.
Not at all. But Tenenbaum argues that the recent protests felt different. He suggested they seemed more organized, maybe even funded by outside groups.
Like state actors. He mentioned the Iran.
He did raise that possibility, yeah. And according to Tenenbaum, this is what led to those really serious accusations of anti-Semitism being leveled against the universities themselves.
Okay, so this is where the money and the ideology really crash into each other.
Exactly. Tenenbaum stressed the very real concern among major Jewish donors about this perceived rise in anti-Semitism on campuses.
Right.
And when a big chunk of your financial support base feels, alienated or unsafe, that creates a huge financial risk for the institution. That donor anxiety becomes leverage.
Which brings us right back to Donald Trump stepping in. Tenenbaum's view is that Trump isn't necessarily starting this, but he's hitting the accelerator on a trend already in motion.
Yeah, pushing things forward faster.
So what were Trump's specific demands, according to Tenenbaum? What did he want from these universities?
Tenenbaum laid it out pretty clearly. Essentially, Trump demanded two main things. One, that universities actively protect Jewish students from attacks, and two, that they stop promoting what he sees as a specific ideology.
And that ideology included?
Things like diversity, integration, those kinds of concepts, according to Tenenbaum's account. And you have to remember the timing, too. With the Supreme Court ruling against affirmative action, universities were already scrambling, looking for other ways to maintain diversity, like different forms of aid. Tenenbaum suggested the Trump administration might go after those methods, too.
And if universities didn't comply, what were the sticks Trump was threatening to use?
Pretty heavy ones. Tenenbaum mentioned threatening to cut off federal funding, which can be substantial for research. Then there was this proposal for a massive tax hike on endowment interest, jumping from like 2% up to 35%.
Oh, 35%.
Yeah, a huge leap. And maybe the most potent threat, tightening visa restrictions for international students.
Why is that so critical?
Because international students often pay the full, very high sticker price for tuition. They're a major revenue stream. Restricting those visas hits the bottom line hard.
Okay, so faced with these threats, how did universities react? It sounds like most of them fell in line.
That's what Tenenbaum reported, yes. Apparently, almost all universities seemed to concede to Trump's demands. They probably did the calculation, looked at the potential financial hit, and decided to comply.
But not Harvard.
Right. Harvard, according to Tenenbaum, refused. Held out.
Harvard, with its $56 billion endowment. So what does Tenenbaum think happens to them now? What's the predicted fallout?
He anticipates a legal battle, one he thinks Harvard is likely to lose, but maybe more immediate and potentially more damaging are those visa restrictions.
The international talent.
Exactly. The Secretary of State has a lot of discretion in issuing visas. They could just deny visas to international professors, researchers, seriously hurting Harvard's ability to attract top minds from around the world.
And what about current students or faculty?
Tenenbaum even raised the possibility of reviewing visas already issued and potentially revoking visas, even green cards, for students involved in protests deemed disruptive. That could mean expulsion, deportation, really serious consequences.
So Tenenbaum really frames Trump's strategy here as ideological at its core, trying to strip out what he sees as subjective views from education, push for more objective information.
Yeah, it's a direct challenge to the direction many universities have taken. While Kayback might have seen a broader political fight initially, Tenenbaum really focuses on this ideological clash.
And given Harvard's decision to resist, Tenenbaum's prediction is pretty bleak for the university.
He seemed to think they were heading for a significant defeat. Yeah.
But then the conversation takes this massive leap, doesn't it? Tenenbaum drops this much more radical prediction.
Oh, yeah. Way beyond the immediate Trump conflict. He basically predicts the potential disappearance of universities as we know them.
Disappearance. Within
5 to 10 years, driven by AI, artificial intelligence.
Oh, okay. That's a huge claim. How does he justify that?
Well, he boils down what universities fundamentally do into two main things: teaching or educating and research.
Right.
And he argues AI is already making massive inroads, especially into the teaching part.
How so?
He contends that for a lot of subjects, particularly technical ones like, say, programming, AI is just becoming a way more efficient, instantly available source for learning and information.
So you don't need the university lecture hall.
His argument is basically, why bother? He even suggests studying fields like that at a traditional university is rapidly becoming kind of pointless.
Okay, but hang on. I know people listening are thinking, what about medicine, engineering, things that need complex reasoning, hands-on skills? Surely AI isn't replacing surgeons or bridge designers anytime soon.
That's the immediate reaction, right? But Tenenbaum directly challenges that. His view is incredibly provocative. He thinks even those secure professions will be massively impacted.
Like how? Robots doing surgery.
He literally talks about AI-powered robots performing surgery with more precision than humans, and AI diagnosing diseases from scans, like X-rays, more accurately than doctors. He cited real examples already happening, like in breast cancer detection. His analogy was the shifts from horses to cars, a fundamental change in transportation. But he adds this twist: AI can also solve its own problems, like making itself more energy efficient. That makes it even more transformative, potentially unstoppable.
Okay, so if we zoom out, connect this to the bigger picture that Tenenbaum and Kayback were discussing, what are the implications for work, for the economy?
Yeah, they're profound. Tenenbaum has this theory that more automation could actually mean higher tax revenues for governments.
Higher. How does that work?
Because companies would have fewer employee salaries and benefits to deduct as business expenses. So a potentially more taxable profit.
Interesting. And what about the cost of everything?
He suggested it could plummet. If AI drives massive efficiency gains across all sorts of industries, he used copper mining as an example, then the cost of goods and services could drop dramatically.
A radically different economic world.
Potentially, yes. But as both Tenenbaum and Kabak pointed out, there's this huge transition period coming, and governments, well, they don't really seem to be talking about these fundamental shifts yet, not in a widespread way.
Tenenbaum used that phrase. We're moving from being protagonists to witnesses.
Yeah, pretty stark framing of our role in this AI-driven evolution.
So Kabak then asked the logical question. Okay, if all this is coming, what should people study in the meantime? What's still relevant?
And Tenenbaum's answer was, no, well, kind of surprising, maybe even unsatisfying for some.
What'd he say?
He basically advised studying what you genuinely enjoy. His rationale seemed to be that learning might shift towards being more of a personal enrichment thing, like a hobby, rather than a direct path to a specific job for many fields.
Learn for learning's sake, because the job market is going to be unrecognizable.
Sort of. He acknowledged how tough that shifting mindset is, especially when you see people still pouring into degrees for fields that AI might seriously disrupt.
What about the other core function research? Surely universities remain the engine for new discoveries.
Tenenbaum thinks even research will eventually be dominated by AI. He contrasted slow, traditional human-led research with AI's potential to rapidly simulate, test, and even invent new things, like new materials. He mentioned metamaterials.
Just more efficient.
Massively more efficient, potentially. Removing human error, bias, fatigue. AI can just crunch data and run experiments at a scale and speed we can't comprehend.
Okay, one last area. What about art? Something so tied to human emotion. What was Tenenbaum's take there?
He did acknowledge art's connection to emotion, which is tricky for AI in terms of genuine originality, that spark that comes from, say, human suffering or joy.
So there's hope for human artists.
Maybe. He pointed out, though, that for many people consuming art, it's the emotional connection that matters, not necessarily pure, groundbreaking novelty. And AI is already getting scary good at combining styles, imitating, generating images that look like Studio Ghibli, for example.
Right, we see that everywhere now.
Yeah. So while that deep wellspring of human experience might still be unique, AI's role in creative fields like music generation or advertising visuals is already growing fast.
So, wrapping this all up, Tenenbaum's predictions really go way beyond just the Trump versus Harvard fight. He's sketching out this potentially fundamental restructuring of universities, and maybe society itself, all driven by AI.
Absolutely. This deep dive really covered two layers. There's the immediate conflict, Trump, Harvard, funding, ideology, donors, anti-Semitism concerns, all those pressures Tenenbaum and Kabak discussed.
Right.
But then there's this much bigger, maybe more profound